The last thing my husband ever said before throwing me out of our home was, "You were only useful while I was climbing." Then he smiled, picked up his expensive leather briefcase, walked past me, and kissed another woman, in the middle of our living room. Not just any woman. She was one of the richest women in New York. A billionaire. Young. Beautiful. Powerful. And standing inside the house I had spent 20 years helping build. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply stood there, holding the grocery bags I had just carried inside. A carton of milk slipped from my hand. It burst across the marble floor. No one even looked down. Ryan looked at his watch instead. "You have 30 minutes. I blinked. "What?" "To pack." His voice sounded colder than I'd ever heard. "I've already changed the locks." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to believe the man I'd loved for 20 years had just become a stranger. "My name is on this house." He smiled. "No, it isn't." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Victoria, the billionaire standing beside him, slowly removed a folder from her designer handbag. She slid it across the kitchen island. "You signed everything." I opened it. Mortgage papers, refinancing agreements, business guarantees, legal transfers. One signature after another. Mine. Every document carried my signature. Ryan crossed his arms. "You always trusted me. You never bothered reading anything." He wasn't wrong. For 20 years, I believed marriage meant trust. Every paper he handed me, I signed. Because he always said, "It's just paperwork." Today, that paperwork had made me homeless. Before we continue, if you love emotional revenge stories with shocking twists and unforgettable endings, subscribe to Bloodline Revenge Stories, like this video, and share it with someone who believes karma always arrives. Now, let's continue. My name is Emma Brooks. I'm 38 years old. And 6 hours before my life collapsed, I still believed I had the perfect marriage. Ryan and I met in college. He wanted to become one of the country's top corporate lawyers. I wanted to open a small design studio. But dreams cost money. We couldn't afford both. So I made a choice. I gave him mine. I worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons in retail, night shifts cleaning office buildings. Sometimes, I slept only 3 hours. Ryan studied. I paid. When law school tuition increased, I sold my late mother's wedding ring. When he needed books, I sold my grandmother's antique piano. When he needed a laptop, I took out another loan. Every sacrifice had one purpose. One day, we would finally build the life we'd dreamed about together. Ryan always kissed my forehead and said, "When I make it, we'll never struggle again." I believed him. Every word. 8 years later, Ryan graduated at the top of his class. The entire auditorium applauded. He stood on stage receiving awards. People called him brilliant. A genius. The future of corporate law. Nobody knew. The woman sitting in the last row had skipped lunch for months, just so he could afford tuition. That woman was me. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded Ryan. Cameras flashed. Someone asked, "Who inspired your success?" Ryan smiled confidently. "My own determination." I waited. Surely, he would mention me. He never did. I quietly smiled anyway. Because love isn't supposed to keep score. Or so I believed. Years passed. Ryan became famous. Magazine covers. Television interviews. Luxury clients. Private jets. His tailored suits became more expensive than my yearly wardrobe. Then, the business dinners started. Followed by overseas conferences. Then came the late-night meetings. Eventually, he stopped wearing his wedding ring. When I asked, he laughed. It confuses clients. I wanted to believe him. So I did. Until, one rainy Thursday afternoon, I was organizing laundry. His suit jacket slipped from the hanger. A hotel key card fell onto the floor. The hotel wasn't in New York. It was in Miami. Ryan had supposedly been attending a legal conference in Chicago that week. I stared at the card for several minutes. Then, I placed it back into his pocket. I told myself there had to be an explanation, because trusting him was easier than imagining the truth. 3 months later, Ryan announced exciting news. A billionaire wants me as her personal attorney. His eyes sparkled. This changes everything. Her name was Victoria Sterling, founder of Sterling Global Capital. Estimated fortune, over $4 billion. The newspapers loved them. New legal genius joins billionaire empire. Ryan practically moved into Victoria's office. Breakfast meetings, dinner meetings, weekend meetings, international meetings. Our conversations became shorter. Our dinners became silent. Sometimes, he didn't come home at all. When I asked if everything was okay, he kissed my forehead without looking at me. I'm doing this for us. Those words sounded familiar. I'd once said them myself. Then came our 20th wedding anniversary. I spent the entire day cooking. His favorite steak, homemade cheesecake, candles, fresh flowers. I even wore the blue dress he'd once called his favorite. 7 o'clock. No Ryan. 8 o'clock. Nothing. 9. Still nothing. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. A text message. Working late. Don't wait up. That was it. 4 words. 20 years deserved 4 words. I sat alone. The candles burned out. The steak turned cold. The cheesecake remained untouched. Around midnight, I switched on the television. Breaking business news. A charity gala. Victoria Sterling, arriving on the red carpet. With Ryan. Not behind her. Beside her. The reporter smiled. What a powerful couple. Ryan didn't correct him. Instead, he smiled for the cameras and placed his hand gently on Victoria's back. My heart shattered. Not because I finally knew the truth. Because he looked happier with her than he'd looked with me in years. The next morning, Ryan came home. He acted as if nothing had happened. He poured himself coffee, opened his laptop, answered emails. Finally, I asked, "Were you with Victoria last night?" He didn't even look up. "Yes. Our anniversary." "I forgot." I laughed softly. "You forgot 20 years." He sighed impatiently. "Emma, you're making this bigger than it is." "No, you already did." For the first time in our marriage, we argued. Really argued. Ryan slammed his coffee mug onto the counter. "I'm building an empire. You worry about candles." I stared at him. "I worried about us." He grabbed his briefcase. "You've become exhausting." The front door slammed, leaving me alone, with 20 years of memories, and the terrifying feeling that my marriage had already ended. I just hadn't been informed yet. 2 weeks later, a luxury black car pulled into our driveway. Victoria Sterling stepped out. Designer heels, white silk suit, diamond earrings. She smiled politely. "I think it's time we met." I had no idea that within the next hour, she and Ryan would destroy everything I'd spent my entire adult life building. Victoria Sterling didn't knock. She simply walked into my home, as if she already owned it. Ryan followed behind her. Calm, confident, almost relieved. Victoria slowly looked around the living room. "The renovations are lovely." I frowned. "You've been here before." Ryan answered before she could. "A few times." My stomach tightened. "This is our house." Ryan corrected me immediately. "Not anymore." I looked from him to Victoria, waiting for someone to laugh. Someone to admit this was a terrible joke. Instead, Ryan placed a thick envelope on the dining table. I've already hired the best divorce attorneys in Manhattan. My hands trembled as I opened it. Divorce petition. Property division. Financial disclosure. Everything had already been prepared. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. 20 years. I whispered. You're ending 20 years with paperwork. Ryan sighed. I ended this marriage a long time ago. You just refused to notice. Victoria folded her arms. Emma. This doesn't have to become ugly. I looked directly at her. You stole my husband. She smiled. No. I offered him the life he deserved. Ryan nodded. You and I wanted different futures. I stared at him. I worked 3 jobs so you could become a lawyer. I gave up everything. He shrugged. And I'm grateful. Grateful. That single word hurt more than an apology ever could. Ryan walked toward the bookshelf. He picked up our wedding photograph. The one taken 20 years earlier. Young. Hopeful. Completely in love. He looked at it for only a second. Then placed it face down. I'm not that man anymore. I quietly replied. No. You're not. Victoria opened another folder. There are a few documents requiring your signature. I laughed. You still think I'll sign papers without reading them? Ryan looked embarrassed for the first time. You've learned. I looked straight into his eyes. Too late. Then came the sentence that destroyed me. Ryan looked around the house. The moving company will arrive at 5. What moving company? They're packing your things. My things. You'll only be taking your personal clothing. I stared at him. What about my furniture? I bought that dining table. My mother's piano. Our photographs. Ryan shook his head. Everything inside this house belongs to the property owner. And that's not you. I suddenly remembered something. 5 years earlier, Ryan had asked me to refinance the house. He said it would reduce our taxes. I never questioned him. That refinance had quietly removed my ownership. Legally, I no longer owned anything. Not even the kitchen where I'd cooked 20 years of family dinners. At exactly 5 o'clock, the movers arrived. Professional. Silent. Efficient. One man politely asked, Mrs. Brooks, which suitcase would you like us to pack? I couldn't answer. Everything inside that house carried a memory. The Christmas ornaments. The old coffee mugs. The blanket we'd bought during our honeymoon. The tiny marks on the wall measuring birthdays that would never come again. Ryan looked at his watch. You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. To erase 20 years. I packed 1 suitcase. Some clothes. A few family photographs. My father's old leather journal. And, without Ryan noticing, the small wooden jewelry box my mother had given me before she died. It wasn't valuable, but it was mine. Everything else stayed behind. As I reached the front door, I turned one last time. I have one question. Ryan nodded. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? He looked away. No. Victoria answered instead. I convinced him honesty would only make this harder. I smiled sadly. No. The betrayal made it harder. I stepped outside. The front door closed behind me. Then, I heard it. The sound of a deadbolt locking. The home I'd spent 20 years creating was officially closed to me forever. That night, I slept inside my 15-year-old Honda. The back seat wasn't long enough. My neck hurt. My back hurt. But none of that compared to the emptiness inside my chest. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I looked toward the dark sky. I don't know what to do anymore. No answer came. Only silence. The following morning, I parked outside a public library, used the restroom to wash my face, brushed my hair, changed clothes, then searched for apartments. Everything was too expensive. Without realizing it, Ryan had destroyed my credit years earlier. Every loan, every guarantee, every financial risk. had quietly been placed in my name. My score was ruined. No landlord wanted me. 3 days later, I checked into a women's homeless shelter. I cried all night. Not because of the room. Because I'd spent years believing loyalty protected people. Now, I realized blind trust could destroy them. Life became simple. Wake up. Job hunt. Interviews. Rejections. Bills. Repeat. Most employers recognized my last name. Are you Ryan Brooks' ex-wife? Yes. Their smiles faded. We'll call you. They never did. One afternoon, while volunteering in the shelter kitchen, an elderly man watched me quietly. You organize people well. I smiled. I used to organize charity events. You understand business. I used to help my husband. He nodded thoughtfully. My name is Samuel Reed. I introduced myself. He suddenly froze. Brooks. Yes. Your father was Michael Carter's business partner. I looked shocked. You knew my father? Samuel smiled warmly. He saved my company 30 years ago. I couldn't believe it. He continued. I've been searching for you. Victoria Sterling didn't knock. She simply walked into my home, as if she already owned it. Ryan followed behind her. Calm, confident, almost relieved. Victoria slowly looked around the living room. The renovations are lovely. I frowned. You've been here before. Ryan answered before she could. A few times. My stomach tightened. This is our house. Ryan corrected me immediately. Not anymore. I looked from him to Victoria, waiting for someone to laugh. Someone to admit this was a terrible joke. Instead, Ryan placed a thick envelope on the dining table. I've already hired the best divorce attorneys in Manhattan. My hands trembled as I opened it. Divorce petition. Property division. Financial disclosure. Everything had already been prepared. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. 20 years. I whispered. You're ending 20 years with paperwork. Ryan sighed. I ended this marriage a long time ago. You just refused to notice. Victoria folded her arms. Emma. This doesn't have to become ugly. I looked directly at her. You stole my husband. She smiled. No. I offered him the life he deserved. Ryan nodded. You and I wanted different futures. I stared at him. I worked 3 jobs so you could become a lawyer. I gave up everything. He shrugged. And I'm grateful. Grateful. That single word hurt more than an apology ever could. Ryan walked toward the bookshelf. He picked up our wedding photograph. The one taken 20 years earlier. Young. Hopeful. Completely in love. He looked at it for only a second. Then placed it face down. I'm not that man anymore. I quietly replied. No. You're not. Victoria opened another folder. There are a few documents requiring your signature. I laughed. You still think I'll sign papers without reading them? Ryan looked embarrassed for the first time. You've learned. I looked straight into his eyes. Too late. Then came the sentence that destroyed me. Ryan looked around the house. The moving company will arrive at 5. What moving company? They're packing your things. My things. You'll only be taking your personal clothing. I stared at him. What about my furniture? I bought that dining table. My mother's piano. Our photographs. Ryan shook his head. Everything inside this house belongs to the property owner. And that's not you. I suddenly remembered something. 5 years earlier, Ryan had asked me to refinance the house. He said it would reduce our taxes. I never questioned him. That refinance had quietly removed my ownership. Legally, I no longer owned anything. Not even the kitchen where I'd cooked 20 years of family dinners. At exactly 5 o'clock, the movers arrived. Professional. Silent. Efficient. One man politely asked. Mrs. Brooks. Which suitcase would you like us to pack? I couldn't answer. Everything inside that house carried a memory. The Christmas ornaments. The old coffee mugs. The blanket we'd bought during our honeymoon. The tiny marks on the wall measuring birthdays that would never come again. Ryan looked at his watch. You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. To erase 20 years. I packed one suitcase. Some clothes. A few family photographs. My father's old leather journal. And, without Ryan noticing, the small wooden jewelry box my mother had given me before she died. It wasn't valuable, but it was mine. Everything else stayed behind. As I reached the front door, I turned one last time. I have one question. Ryan nodded. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? He looked away. No. Victoria answered instead. I convinced him honesty would only make this harder. I smiled sadly. No. The betrayal made it harder. I stepped outside. The front door closed behind me. Then, I heard it. The sound of a deadbolt locking. The home I'd spent 20 years creating was officially closed to me forever. That night, I slept inside my 15-year-old Honda. The back seat wasn't long enough. My neck hurt. My back hurt. But none of that compared to the emptiness inside my chest. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I looked toward the dark sky. I don't know what to do anymore. No answer came. Only silence. The following morning, I parked outside a public library, used the restroom to wash my face, brushed my hair, changed clothes, then searched for apartments. Everything was too expensive. Without realizing it, Ryan had destroyed my credit years earlier. Every loan, every guarantee, every financial risk had quietly been placed in my name. My score was ruined. No landlord wanted me. 3 days later, I checked into a women's homeless shelter. I cried all night. Not because of the room. Because I'd spent years believing loyalty protected people. Now, I realized blind trust could destroy them. Life became simple. Wake up. Job hunt. Interviews. Rejections. Bills. Repeat. Most employers recognized my last name. Are you Ryan Brooks' ex-wife? Yes. Their smiles faded. We'll call you. They never did. One afternoon, while volunteering in the shelter kitchen, an elderly man watched me quietly. You organize people well. I smiled. I used to organize charity events. You understand business. I used to help my husband. He nodded thoughtfully. My name is Samuel Reed. I introduced myself. He suddenly froze. Brooks? Yes. Your father was Michael Carter's business partner. I looked shocked. You knew my father? Samuel smiled warmly. He saved my company 30 years ago. I couldn't believe it. He continued. I've been searching for you. My heart skipped. For me. Your father left something unfinished. I frowned. What do you mean? Samuel reached into his briefcase, pulled out a faded envelope. On the front, written in my father's handwriting, were 3 simple words. For Emma. My hands began shaking. My father had been gone for nearly 15 years. How could this exist? Samuel smiled. He made me promise that I'd only give this to you if life ever forced you to start over. Tears filled my eyes. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small silver key. I unfolded the paper. The first sentence made my knees weak. Emma, if you're reading this, someone has taken everything from you. Samuel looked at me quietly. Your father believed one day you would need a second chance. I looked at the silver key in my hand. What does it open? Samuel smiled. The future. I couldn't stop staring at the silver key. It looked ordinary, small, old, almost worthless. But my father's letter said otherwise. Samuel Reed smiled. Your father always believed people reveal who they truly are when everything is taken away. I looked up. He knew this would happen. Samuel sighed. He didn't know your husband. But he understood human nature. He knew success changes people. He wanted to make sure no one could ever destroy you completely. I unfolded the letter again. My father's handwriting was as neat as I remembered. Emma. If life has brought you to this letter, it means someone you trusted valued money more than loyalty. Tears blurred the words. Don't waste your life chasing revenge. Build something so meaningful that revenge becomes unnecessary. I smiled through my tears. Those were exactly the words my father would have written. Then I reached the final paragraph. The key belongs to safe deposit box 417. Inside is everything I couldn't tell you while I was alive. The next morning, Samuel drove me to an old private bank in Manhattan. It wasn't flashy. No giant glass towers. Just a quiet brick building that had existed for more than a century. The bank manager greeted Samuel warmly. Mr. Reed. He nodded. I'm here for Michael Carter's daughter. The manager immediately understood. He looked at me. You've waited a long time. I didn't know it existed. He smiled gently. Your father hoped you never would. Minutes later, we entered a secure underground vault. Rows of steel boxes stretched across the walls. The manager stopped in front of one. 417. My hands trembled as I inserted the silver key. The lock clicked. Inside wasn't jewelry, wasn't cash. It was a thick leather folder, several flash drives, a sealed envelope, and one small notebook. I carefully opened the notebook first. The first page read, Carter Digital Systems. I frowned. Samuel smiled. Your father and I started that company 30 years ago. What company? A software company. I stared at him. My father worked in manufacturing. Samuel laughed softly. That's what everyone believed. He explained everything. 30 years earlier, my father had quietly invested in a tiny software startup. When technology exploded, the company slowly became incredibly valuable. But before it could go public, he became sick. Knowing he wouldn't live much longer, he secretly transferred his shares into a trust. Not for himself. For me. I couldn't believe it. Why didn't anyone tell me? Samuel became serious. Because your father was afraid someone would marry you for your money. I immediately thought of Ryan. Ryan couldn't take his eyes off the magazine. Emma's photograph covered the front page. The woman he had thrown out of their home, the woman he believed would never recover, was now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His secretary smiled. She's incredible. Ryan forced a laugh. Yeah. But inside, his confidence was collapsing. That evening, Ryan walked into Victoria Sterling's penthouse carrying the magazine. Victoria barely looked up from her laptop. What is it? He placed the magazine on the table. Victoria's eyes landed on the headline. The quiet CEO who built a billion-dollar tech company. She slowly picked it up. Read every page. Then, she smiled. Ryan frowned. You're smiling. Victoria nodded. Emma Carter. What about her? She owns something I want. Ryan stared. What do you mean? Victoria looked directly at him. Her software. Our investment company has been trying to buy it for months. Ryan's heart skipped. You never told me. I didn't know she owned it. She closed the magazine. But now I do. Across the city, Emma stood inside the executive boardroom. Large screens displayed company growth. Revenue had doubled again. International expansion was ahead of schedule. Employees applauded as she entered. Samuel Reed smiled proudly. Congratulations. Emma laughed. For what? You've officially crossed $1 billion in company valuation. The room erupted in applause. Emma quietly looked out the window. 5 years earlier, she had been sleeping inside her car. Now, she owned the building she was standing in. But despite everything, she still remembered exactly how homelessness felt. Later that afternoon, her assistant entered. Emma. You have an unusual meeting request. Who? She handed over business card. Ryan Brooks. Emma stared silently. 5 years. Not one phone call. Not one apology. Now, he wanted a meeting. She smiled. Tell him. I'm unavailable. Ryan wasn't surprised. He tried again. Flowers. Rejected. Email. Ignored. Handwritten letter. Returned unopened. Victoria watched all of it. Finally she asked. Still in love with her? Ryan looked offended. No. Then why are you trying so hard? He hesitated. I need closure. Victoria laughed. No. You need access. Ryan looked away. Because she was right. Emma's company had become one of the most valuable technology firms in America. Representing her would make him famous again. 1 week later, Victoria made her move. She publicly announced. Sterling Capital intended to purchase Carter Digital Systems. News channels exploded. Business reporters called it the deal of the decade. Offer price. $3.8 billion. Board members celebrated. Investors celebrated. Financial media predicted Emma would accept immediately. Only Emma wasn't celebrating. She quietly read the offer, then slid it across the table. Samuel looked confused. What do you think? Emma smiled. It's too small. Samuel laughed. $3.8 billion. Too small. Emma nodded. They're buying today's company. They have no idea what will become tomorrow. The following morning, Emma called an emergency board meeting. I've decided. Everyone waited. We're rejecting Sterling Capital. The room became silent. One executive almost stood up. Emma. That's the biggest offer in company history. She smiled calmly. I know. But my father didn't build this company. So someone else could own it. The board voted. Unanimously. The answer was no. Victoria wasn't used to hearing that word. When the rejection letter arrived, she read it twice, then 3 times. Finally, she looked at Ryan. She rejected me. Ryan quietly replied, Emma doesn't sell things she believes in. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Interesting. 3 months later, Victoria launched a hostile takeover. She quietly bought millions of shares from outside investors. News channels exploded again. Sterling Capital moves to take control of Carter Digital. Business analysts predicted Emma would lose everything. Reporters crowded outside company headquarters. Microphones everywhere. Cameras everywhere. One reporter shouted, Emma. Can Carter Digital survive? She smiled. Absolutely. Then she walked inside. The emergency board meeting lasted 6 hours. Executives looked terrified. One director whispered, We don't have enough voting shares. Samuel looked toward Emma. You've been strangely calm. Emma reached into her briefcase, pulled out another folder. I've been waiting for this day. She placed dozens of documents on the table. Everyone leaned forward. Samuel's eyes widened. You. She smiled. While everyone watched Sterling Capital buying shares. I quietly bought them back. Over 5 years, Emma had secretly created several investment companies. None carried her name. Each one slowly purchased Carter Digital stock. Legally, quietly, patiently. Today, together, they controlled 74% of the company. Victoria never had a chance. Across Manhattan, Victoria received another phone call. She listened silently. Her face slowly changed. Then, she slammed her phone onto the desk. Ryan looked shocked. What happened? Victoria answered through clenched teeth. We lost. What? Emma owns almost everything. Ryan couldn't believe it. Victoria whispered. She planned this years ago. That evening, financial news interrupted every major television network. Breaking news. Carter Digital defeats Sterling Capital in one of the largest failed hostile takeovers in American corporate history. Analysts called Emma brilliant. Investors called her fearless. Business magazines called her the queen of strategic investing. Ryan sat alone in his office, watching interview after interview. Emma appeared calm, confident, graceful. Nothing like the frightened woman he'd abandoned. He quietly whispered, I underestimated you. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Emma received a private phone call. Unknown number. She answered. Hello. Silence. Then, Ryan's voice. Emma. I just wanted to say. I'm proud of you. Emma smiled sadly, for the first time in 25 years. So am I. She ended the call. Without another word, Ryan slowly lowered the phone. For the first time, he realized something terrifying. Emma no longer hated him. My husband left me homeless for his billionaire mistress. 5 years later, he begged outside my penthouse part 7. The greatest revenge was never revenge. Ryan barely slept that night. For the first time in years, he wasn't lying in a luxury penthouse. He wasn't surrounded by servants. He wasn't wearing a designer suit. He was sleeping in a small guest room. Inside Emma's home, the woman he had once thrown into the street had given him a warm bed. Not because he deserved it, because she refused to become like him. At 6 the next morning, Emma knocked on the door. Breakfast is ready. Ryan quietly followed her downstairs. The dining table was simple. Coffee, toast, fresh fruit. Nothing extravagant. Ryan looked around. I expected. Emma smiled. What? Something more luxurious. She looked at him calmly. I learned something while I was homeless. You don't appreciate luxury until you've appreciated enough. Ryan lowered his eyes. An hour later, Emma drove him to the homeless shelter. The director smiled. You actually came. Ryan nodded. I promised. The director handed him an apron. Today you'll clean the dining hall. Ryan accepted it without complaint. Throughout the day, he washed dishes, scrubbed floors, served meals, listened to veterans, single mothers, runaway teenagers, families living in cars. For the first time, he wasn't helping wealthy clients avoid taxes. He was helping people survive another day. Every face reminded him of Emma. Every story reminded him how blind he had once been. Weeks turned into months. Ryan never missed a shift. He arrived before sunrise, left after sunset. The volunteers slowly stopped seeing him as the famous lawyer. They simply called him Ryan. One afternoon, a little girl walked into the shelter holding her father's hand. She looked frightened. Ryan knelt beside her. It's okay. We'll take care of you. The little girl smiled. At that moment, Ryan remembered something Emma had once said. Kindness costs nothing. He finally understood. Meanwhile, Emma quietly watched his progress. She never visited. She never praised him. She simply received weekly reports from the shelter director. One sentence appeared again and again. Ryan never asks for recognition. Emma smiled. Maybe People really could change. 6 months later, a major business magazine requested an interview with Emma. The reporter asked, "After everything your ex-husband did, why did you help him?" Emma answered calmly, "Because revenge ends the moment someone suffers. But healing can last forever." The interview went viral. Millions watched. Millions shared it. People called Emma the billionaire who chose compassion. One evening, Samuel Reed arrived at Emma's office carrying another envelope. "I've been waiting years to give you this." Emma looked confused. "What is it?" "It's the final letter your father left." Her hands trembled. "There was another one." Samuel nodded. "He told me. Only give it to you when you no longer wanted revenge." Emma slowly opened the envelope. Inside, her father's familiar handwriting appeared one last time. "My sweet Emma, if you're reading this, it means pain didn't turn your heart into stone." Tears filled her eyes. Money can build houses. Success can build companies. But forgiveness builds people. She wiped away tears, then reached the final sentence. "I'm proud of the woman you've become." Emma quietly closed the letter. She looked toward the sunset. "Thank you, Dad." Exactly 1 year after Ryan entered the shelter, Emma invited him to lunch. He arrived wearing a simple suit. Not expensive, just clean, respectful. He looked healthier, happier, older, but somehow more genuine. They sat across from each other. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness." Emma smiled. "I know. I don't expect another chance. I know. I only wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. For everything." Emma looked into his eyes. For the first time in years, she believed him. Ryan reached into his pocket. He placed something on the table. Emma stared. It was their wedding photograph. The same one Ryan had turned face down years ago. "I kept it," he whispered. "Not because I deserved the memories, but because I deserved the regret." Emma slowly picked it up. She smiled softly. "We were happy once." Ryan nodded. "Before I forgot who helped me become successful." Emma stood. "So, where do we go from here?" Ryan smiled sadly. "We don't. I think our story ended a long time ago." Emma nodded. "I think you're right." They shook hands. Not as husband and wife. Not as enemies. Simply as two people who had finally found peace. 3 years later, the Emma Carter Foundation had built shelters in 12 cities. Thousands of families had found homes. Thousands of women had escaped financial abuse. Thousands of children had second chances. Ryan became the foundation's full-time legal advisor. Not for money. He refused every paycheck. "This is how I repay my debt," he always said. Emma never argued. One autumn afternoon, Emma stood outside the first house her foundation had ever purchased. A young woman accepted the keys. She burst into tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Emma smiled. "You already did. By refusing to give up." The young woman hugged her tightly. Across the street, Ryan quietly watched. Samuel walked beside him. "You still love her?" Ryan smiled. "I'll probably love her forever." Samuel nodded. "But now, you love her enough to let her be happy." Ryan looked toward Emma. "Yes." A year later, Emma married again. Not a billionaire. Not a celebrity. A kind high school history teacher named Daniel. A man who knew her story before he ever knew her success. Ryan attended the wedding. He sat quietly in the last row. When Emma walked down the aisle, their eyes met for a brief second. She smiled. He smiled back. No bitterness. No jealousy. Only gratitude. Because he had finally learned. Real love isn't about possession. It's about wanting someone else's happiness, even when it no longer includes you. As the ceremony ended, Ryan quietly slipped away before the reception. Outside, snow had begun to fall. He looked toward the sky. I hope you're watching, Michael. Emma's father. I finally understand. Then he walked away, not as the man who had destroyed his marriage, but as a man who had finally rebuilt himself. Emma often thought. Ryan lowered his head. Every word reminded him of the kindness he'd never shown her. After the event, Ryan quietly returned to the shelter. The director stopped him. Someone paid for all your medical bills. Ryan looked confused. My medical bills? Yes. They asked us not to tell you. But I think you deserve to know. Who? The director smiled. Emma Carter. Ryan felt tears filling his eyes. She had helped him, without asking for anything, without expecting gratitude, without even telling him. Christmas arrived. New York was covered in snow. Ryan had nowhere to go. He wandered the streets, remembering every Christmas Emma had planned. The decorations, the music, the homemade cookies. He had once taken those moments for granted. Now, he would have given anything to experience one more. That night, the shelter reached maximum capacity. No beds remained. Ryan walked through the freezing streets. Snow fell harder. His hands were numb. His breathing became difficult. Finally, he remembered something. A newspaper article. Emma owned one of Manhattan's newest luxury residential towers. He looked toward the glowing skyline. I don't deserve her help, he whispered. But I have nowhere else to go. Nearly an hour later, Ryan stood outside the entrance. The building was breathtaking. Glass walls, private security, luxury cars lined the entrance. He almost turned around. Instead, he walked toward the doorman. I'm looking for Emma Carter. The doorman looked him over. Do you have an appointment? Ryan shook his head. No, please. Just tell her Ryan Brooks is here. The doorman hesitated, then quietly made the call. Upstairs, Emma stood inside her penthouse overlooking Central Park. Her assistant entered. Ms. Carter. There's someone downstairs. Emma looked up. Who? The assistant answered softly. Ryan Brooks. Emma remained completely still. 5 years. 5 long years. And now, the man who once threw her into the street was standing outside her front door. Her assistant asked, should security remove him? Emma slowly walked toward the window. She looked down. Ryan stood alone in the snow, wearing an old coat, head lowered, hands trembling. Exactly the way she had once stood outside the home he'd taken from her. She quietly closed her eyes, then spoke 4 words. Bring him upstairs. Her assistant looked surprised. Are you sure? Emma nodded. Very. A few minutes later, the private elevator doors slowly opened. Ryan stepped inside the penthouse. His shoes left wet footprints across the marble floor. He looked around in disbelief. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Original artwork. A grand piano. Everything spoke of success. Then, Emma appeared, wearing a simple cream-colored sweater. No jewelry, no anger, no smile. Ryan looked at her. His voice broke. Emma. I'm sorry. Then, for the first time in his life, Ryan Brooks fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. I have nowhere else to go. Emma stood silently, looking at the man who had once believed she was nothing. The room remained silent. Finally, Emma spoke. I remember another winter. Ryan slowly looked up. You told me. I had 30 minutes to leave. She walked closer. You watched me pack one suitcase. You locked the door behind me. Ryan couldn't stop crying. I know. I think about it every day. Emma looked directly into his eyes. The difference between us. I won't make you sleep outside. Ryan closed his eyes in relief. But Emma wasn't finished. She pointed toward the elevator. Tomorrow morning. You're coming with me. Where? Emma answered calmly. To the homeless shelter. The one that saved my life. You'll spend the next year volunteering there. You'll learn every meal. You'll help every person who walks through those doors. Ryan nodded immediately. I'll do anything. Emma looked out at the falling snow. My father once told me. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's giving them the chance to become someone better. Ryan quietly whispered. Do you think I can? Emma looked back at him. I don't know. But tomorrow. We'll find out. The man outside my penthouse. Ryan Brooks had lost everything. His law license was suspended. His reputation was destroyed. Every major client had walked away. The expensive Manhattan penthouse Victoria once shared with him had already been sold by the court. His luxury cars were repossessed. His designer suits were auctioned. The friends who once filled his weekends with yacht parties stopped answering his calls. Within 6 months, Ryan went from appearing on magazine covers to standing in line at a homeless shelter for dinner. The first time he entered the shelter, he kept his head down. He hoped no one would recognize him. But they did. A volunteer looked at him for a long moment. Weren't you? Ryan quietly nodded. I used to be. The volunteer simply handed him a tray. No one cares who you used to be. Everyone here is just trying to survive. For the first time in years, no one wanted his business card. No one cared about his expensive education. No one admired his success. They only asked one question. Are you hungry? Meanwhile, Emma's life had become everything she'd once dreamed of. Carter Digital had expanded into 12 countries. She had launched the Emma Carter Foundation, providing legal aid, housing, and job training for women escaping financial abuse. She never forgot sleeping in her car. She never forgot the shelter that gave her hope. So every year, she quietly donated millions. Without cameras. Without interviews. Without announcing her name. One snowy December evening, Emma attended the opening of a new housing project funded by her foundation. A reporter asked, "Why are you so passionate about helping homeless women?" Emma smiled softly. Because I know how quickly someone's entire life can disappear. The reporter looked surprised. You've experienced homelessness. Emma simply nodded, then walked away. She had never publicly shared her story. She never needed sympathy. She only wanted change. Across town, Ryan sat alone on a park bench. Snow covered his thin jacket. His hands shook from the cold. Inside his wallet, he had exactly $17. He stared at an old photograph. It was him and Emma, 20 years younger, standing outside their first tiny apartment, both smiling, both believing love could survive anything. He whispered, "I'm sorry." There was no one there to hear him. The next morning, Ryan visited 3 law firms. Each rejected him. "I'm sorry. Your name brings too much attention." One managing partner quietly added, "You are one of the best lawyers I've ever seen. But clients don't hire scandals." Ryan nodded. "I understand." Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, Ryan began sleeping at the same shelter where Emma had once spent her first winter. He volunteered in exchange for meals, cleaning tables, serving soup, washing dishes. The work reminded him of something. Emma, 4 years. She had quietly worked jobs like these, while supporting his dream. He had never truly thanked her. One afternoon, the shelter director approached him. "Ryan, we need volunteers for a charity event." "What kind of event?" "A fundraising dinner." "Who's hosting it?" The director smiled. "The Emma Carter Foundation." Ryan froze. Emma. He hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. The fundraiser took place inside one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels. Ryan wasn't invited as a guest. He wore a volunteer apron. His job was simple. Refill water glasses. Clear empty plates. Stay invisible. As guests arrived, he watched politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and billionaires enter the ballroom. Then, a line of black luxury SUVs stopped outside. Security quickly surrounded the entrance. The room became silent. Emma stepped out. Elegant white evening gown. Diamond earrings. Calm smile. Confident posture. The crowd immediately applauded. Ryan couldn't move. The woman he had abandoned now walked through the room like someone who belonged there. Because she did. Emma greeted volunteers before entering. She thanked each person personally. Then, she reached Ryan. For one brief second, their eyes met. Neither spoke. Emma smiled politely. Thank you for volunteering. Then she continued walking. She hadn't ignored him. She hadn't embarrassed him. She simply treated him like every other volunteer. And somehow, that hurt even more. Later that evening, Emma gave a speech. I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to wonder where you'll sleep. I know what it's like to believe your life is over. The audience listened silently. Emma smiled. But one act of kindness can become someone's second chance.